You picture Crusaders from Hollywood movies, noble knights in gleaming armor charging across desert sands with banners flying. You think you understand the Crusades from historical epics, but that's complete fiction. These weren't righteous warriors fighting honorable battles. They were disease-ridden survivors who abandoned every rule of warfare to become masters of psychological terror. What I'm about to reveal will destroy everything you've romanticized about Crusader combat. Forget everything you've seen about noble knights charging across pristine battlefields. The average Crusader was dying slowly from dysentery, malaria, or infected wounds long before he ever saw combat. Welcome to medieval biological warfare, where disease killed 10 times more Crusaders than enemy swords ever did. These weren't the gleaming warriors you've imagined. Most Crusader armies were 70% infantry, desperate peasants, criminals fleeing justice, and landless younger sons with nothing to lose. They marched thousands of miles through hostile territory with inadequate supplies, watching their companions die from preventable diseases and starvation. Even water was a gamble. A single sip from a contaminated stream could wipe out entire units within days. But here's what separates Crusader tactics from every medieval battle you've romanticized. They didn't fight fair fights. They couldn't afford to. Crusaders developed siege warfare techniques specifically designed to maximize civilian casualties. They learned that starving a city into submission was more effective than storming the walls. They would poison wells, burn crops, and systematically destroy everything that could sustain human life. When cities finally surrendered, what happened next wasn't mercy. It was a calculated extermination designed to terrorize the next city into immediate surrender. Now, the massacre at Jerusalem wasn't religious fury, it was strategic terror. And this tactical brutality created something that would make modern special forces operations look restrained. But what they did to survive the journey to the Holy Land would shock you even more. The Crusader armies you've seen in movies never happened. Those organized columns of disciplined knights? Pure fantasy. Real Crusader armies were refugee camps with weapons. Tens of thousands of people, men, women, children, and the elderly, stretched across miles of hostile territory with no central command, no reliable supply lines, and often no clear idea where they were going. Chroniclers describe them not as armies, but as human floods spilling across Europe and the Near East, consuming everything in their path. Food shortages hit almost immediately. They ate their horses first, then the leather from their boots. Then, when desperation reached its peak, each other. Cannibalism wasn't a shameful rumor. It was openly recorded. When Peter the Hermit's ragged Crusaders reached Byzantine territory, they were systematically consuming their own dead to survive. And the shocking part is how casually medieval chroniclers mentioned it, as if noting a change in the weather. But survival wasn't their only concern. Crusader armies moved like locusts, stripping entire regions bare of resources. Villages were emptied, fields trampled, livestock slaughtered. They weren't simply marching to war, they were conducting a years-long campaign of economic annihilation across 3 continents. To see them coming meant ruin for everyone in their path. Jewish communities across Europe learned to evacuate entire cities before Crusader forces arrived. This wasn't just about religious persecution, it was calculated plunder. Chroniclers admitted they could not bring themselves to describe the methods in detail, but the results were undeniable. Entire communities broken apart, wealth seized, survivors scattered. The march itself was a crucible. Anyone who survived it was hardened beyond recognition. The psychological conditioning required, enduring hunger, disease, violence, and the constant sight of death, reshaped ordinary peasants into something that medieval witnesses struggled to classify as human. And even that reality pales compared to how they actually fought once they finally reached the Holy Land. Forget the sword and shield combat you've imagined. Crusaders in actual battle used whatever worked, and what worked was horrifying. Greek fire wasn't just a weapon, it was psychological warfare that burned through armor, flesh, and bone, while producing screams that could be heard for miles. Crusaders learned to manufacture and deploy it, not just against fortifications, but directly against human beings. But their most effective weapons weren't medieval at all. Crusaders perfected the use of biological warfare centuries before germ theory existed. They would catapult diseased corpses over city walls, not randomly, but after carefully calculating wind patterns and water supplies to maximize epidemic spread. Siege equipment wasn't designed to break walls efficiently. It was designed to create maximum psychological impact. Trebuchets launching severed heads of captured defenders, catapults hurling burning pigs to create panic and chaos. These weren't crude weapons, they were precision instruments of terror. When Crusaders finally engaged in close combat, they fought with techniques specifically developed for killing heavily armored opponents as quickly and brutally as possible. They learned to use crossbows at point-blank range to punch through mail. They developed blade techniques for hamstringing horses and then methodically butchering the fallen riders. But here's what truly separated Crusader combat from every battle you've romanticized. They learned to fight while completely abandoning the concept of mercy, not just for enemies but for their own wounded. Crusader medical practice meant deciding who could be saved and systematically killing everyone else to prevent them from slowing down the army. And this tactical cruelness created warriors who viewed human life as a disposable resource. But what they did to captured enemies would be considered war crimes even by medieval standards. Crusaders didn't just kill their enemies. They developed systematic techniques for breaking human beings that went far beyond anything you've seen in movies. Medieval chroniclers documented Crusader interrogation techniques that were specifically designed to maximize information extraction through psychological destruction. They learned that threatening family members was more effective than physical torture. They developed methods for breaking down a prisoner's sense of identity before extracting tactical intelligence. But this wasn't random cruelty. Crusader commanders developed detailed manuals for psychological warfare. They learned exactly how much torture was required to get reliable information, how to use prisoners as propaganda tools, and how to create examples that would terrify entire regions into submission. Captured enemy leaders weren't ransomed. They were publicly executed using methods specifically calculated to demonstrate Crusader technical superiority. These executions weren't quick religious ceremonies. They were theatrical performances designed to communicate exactly what would happen to anyone who continued to resist. The psychological conditioning required to maintain this level of systematic brutality meant that Crusaders developed meditation techniques specifically designed to suppress empathy and moral reasoning. They learned to view enemy populations as obstacles to be cleared rather than human beings to be defeated. Modern military psychologists recognize these techniques as deliberate conditioning for sociopathic behavior. Crusaders underwent this psychological transformation not as individuals but as entire armies. They created military cultures where mercy was treated as tactical weakness and brutality was considered religious virtue. But even understanding their psychological conditioning won't prepare you for what happened when Crusader armies finally achieved their objectives. Look at what Crusaders actually accomplished, and you'll see something that would make modern war crimes tribunals work for decades. The conquest of Jerusalem wasn't a single battle followed by occupation. It was systematic extermination that continued for days after the city surrendered. Crusader chroniclers documented techniques for identifying and eliminating every potential source of future resistance. Men, women, children, elderly, anyone who might remember life before Crusader rule. This wasn't bloodthirsty religious fury. This was calculated ethnic cleansing applied with medieval efficiency. Crusaders developed administrative techniques for managing conquered populations that prioritized long-term control over short-term mercy. They learned exactly how much of a population could be eliminated without destroying the economic productivity of a region. The Crusader states weren't maintained through heroic battles against overwhelming odds. They were sustained through systematic campaigns of terror designed to prevent any possibility of coordinated resistance. Every few years, Crusader armies would conduct pacification campaigns that methodically eliminated anyone who might potentially threaten their rule. Modern historians estimate that Crusader military techniques resulted in population reductions of 60 to 80% in conquered territories, not through battle casualties, but through deliberate policies designed to remake entire regions according to Crusader strategic requirements. So when you imagine Crusaders as romantic heroes fighting for religious ideals, understand what you're really romanticizing. Military campaigns that pioneered techniques for systematic population control that wouldn't be seen again until the 20th century. The Crusaders you've seen in movies never existed because the reality was too horrifying for popular entertainment. They weren't heroes or villains. They were something far more disturbing. Ordinary people who learned to commit atrocities so efficiently that medieval chroniclers struggled to find words for what they witnessed. You think you know what medieval warfare looked like because you've never imagined what human beings are actually capable of when survival becomes more important than humanity.